Hello. As promised, we came up with like a way to start the video. So from now on, here is what we shall start with. Welcome to Mosque of Renewal, the place where we engage, interpret, and renew Islamic tradition from a place of empowerment. This week, we're going to be talking about the very first of our values, which is that and the one that Muslims all over the world, for the most part, share, which is the double shahada. Um, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. And we're going to talk about why we might believe in that, why anyone would, what that means to us, just everything. Um, I think it's important to have a space to discuss those things because it can be seen as like a foundation of Islamic belief, but maybe it's something that you're struggling with and you don't feel like you have a space to have that conversation because like, what? You don't believe in God? How can you call yourself a Muslim or something like that? We care a lot about having conversations that are open and honest and that lack judgment, like not lack judgment, that we without judgment, without feeling that someone's going to be judged for their views here. If you are watching this on YouTube, definitely encourage you to comment below. Just make sure it's respectful and non-judgmental. The idea here is that we have an open conversation, and no one learns if they don't have the space to be open and honest about where they're at. Yeah. Do you have anything you want to add to start us off this week?
Not really. I started us off last week, so I was thinking you would go first with your viewpoints.
Okay. Um, so the Shahada. I like as a convert. I know that's a word that some people don't like. In some ways, I don't like it either because it implies that I moved from one religion to another, where I feel like uh, more it felt like Islam to me, and choosing a religious tradition to follow was a way of engaging with my spirituality more deeply and with more focus. So I didn't feel like, oh, I was practicing something else and now I have changed my views and now I am a Muslim. I very much felt like I was like God told me that I needed to engage with a religious tradition in order to challenge me and to grow because I'd kind of gone as far as I could on my own. Basically, is the feeling and the message that I got, and we all have our journeys. I'm not necessarily going to go over right now why I chose Islam, but I will. And talking about this, I think when I was thinking about Islam, one of the things I really had to ask myself was, could I be okay with that second part of the Shahada? Like, I had no problem with the first one, that there is no God but God. I've believed in God since I was, I don't know, always. uh, and I've also kind of had this almost weird, like, protective defensive position towards God when it comes to religion. I was like, God is great, and religion sometimes messes it up. And so I really had to ask myself, did I trust and did I have this belief that this person who lived, in this specific time, specific place that we name Muhammad, the prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was he someone that I trusted to guide me in religion? Was he someone's that I trusted spoke for God, and whose word that I could follow in order to learn more about God? Um, and I think that in order to be able to say that with honesty, I had to learn more about the prophet. And then it was really important to me that um, in saying that I believed that Muhammad was the prophet of God, I wasn't saying that Muhammad was the only prophet of God. I think one of the things that was really important about Islam for me is that it acknowledged the presence of other prophets. And basically wasn't saying this is the person you're going to follow and the only person you can follow from now on. Uh, because I just wasn't there. I think
Mm-hmm.
like there are some people that can follow just one prophet in the world and that prophet is enough for them. Like I don't think that you necessarily need to step out of like I need to follow all the prophets in order to figure out because I think like all of them we're sent with complete knowledge, or at least we're sent with enough of a path that, like, for one person to follow, right? But I will say, like, I just wasn't in a place in my life or in my practice where I was comfortable like restricting myself to one person's tradition, um, because because I still had kind of that defensive stance of like, I'm not sure. I've seen how human beings get God wrong a lot, how human beings get spirituality wrong, and so it was really important to me at the beginning of my journey to be able to have that freedom, to say that yes, I believe that Muhammad was a prophet of God, but not the only one. So there's more to say, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure. Like, what about you? What do you?
Yeah. So I grew up in a household where we did not go to church or synagogue or anything. My parents were both raised in a Christian, Lutheran, and Catholic households. Um, and they always felt like it was forced on them. And so they wanted to raise me and my brother to make our own decisions when it came to religion. And so my grandma would take me to church with her. She was really, really, really Irish Catholic. Almost became a nun, but she showed me this really beautiful side of Christianity, where she took what Jesus taught to heart and like was respectful and loving to everybody. Like, I don't ever remember hearing my grandma say something mean or like horrible things about people that were different from her. Um, she may have had those views and just kept them to herself, but I don't know. She always taught me to respect everybody and be charitable and be kind, and she really instilled those values into me. And then when I was in high school, so I've always kind of believed that like God exists. Like, too much in my life has happened that it can't be chance.
Mhm.
Um, I'm adopted. My birth mother was 15 years old when I was born, and I got placed with this family who has been the perfect fit for me. Yeah, we don't always see eye to eye, but even when we fight, like, we can still be a family together. And I know that they support me and love me no matter what path I go down. And just my life's just been one big giant drama. But I've always made it through, and I've always made it through stronger. And I know that's because God doesn't want me to be weak. So I, in high school, became a Christian. I went to Bible study with a bunch of my friends, and I always had an issue with the divinity of Jesus. Like, I felt like Jesus was this, had these taught, you know, gave God's word and taught God's lessons. Um, but I didn't quite agree with him being like God Jr. So, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, he's a blessing from God. Like, I believe in the virgin birth and the immaculate conception of, but I don't think that he's divine. And that always was like my big issue with Christianity, was this whole like, why am I worshiping Jesus? I should be worshiping God.
Mhm.
So when I was a senior in high school, our big war on terror started. And I've always really hated watching people get discriminated against. So I started studying Islam so that I could like defend Muslims in my community against the hatred. They were already singled out because they were different and more than likely brown, in our very white community, big suburbs.
Yeah.
And the more I studied and the more I studied, the more I realized that that was so in line, like what I was reading about Islam was so in line with what I believed.
Mm-hmm.
And it just became a natural progression. I mean, I was probably 6, 7 years of studying before I finally converted and made the step. And it's been 11 years now. Um, and it, like, Muhammad is the final prophet, but like Jesus is also super important to me just because of my upbringing. And he's also really important and is seen as a true Muslim in Islam as well. And so, like, my traditions from growing up, I can carry forward, and that's something that's really important to me.
Yeah.
While feeling like that my belief structure and like my personal philosophies like fit in really well with what I was learning about Islam.
Um, you can clarify this what you meant just
Yeah.
quickly to anyone who may not be familiar with how Islam speaks about prophets and previous figures in the Abrahamic faiths. At the time when Islam was created, the word Muslim just meant someone who submitted to God. A kind of modern day English equivalent would be a monotheist, and particularly usually like an Abrahamic monotheist, but it actually didn't mean specifically
Yeah.
Abrahamic because it said there were lots of traditions who we don't even know about.
Yeah.
So like when a lot of times if you're reading like an English Quran, it may say blah 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 was a Muslim, and you're like, what? That person wasn't a Muslim because it
Yeah.
Muslim has come to mean like a specific religion in our time. It might be useful to just translate it as a monotheist. So like
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was a true monotheist. He
Yeah.
believed in God and in one God.
Yeah.
Um,
And submitted to the will of God and shared God's word with and lessons with, his community and his followers.
Yeah, and there's so much to unpack here,
Yeah.
but just to keep going, like I think one of the reasons I like that's important to think about in the word Muslim is like a lot of times how we speak about religion today is about having the right beliefs. Like I
Mm-hmm.
believe this and believe that and believe that, and I can say I believe those things. It's like very mental and cognitive. Whereas like being a Muslim is like I believe and therefore I do,
Mm-hmm.
or just that idea that like if you believe these things it also implies you act a certain way in the world. So kind of getting into that, what would you say to someone who is just like I don't know if I can believe in God. Like where did like the Big Bang, as far as we know, completely explains the creation of the universe. Like what do you mean, is there another cause other than the physical causes that we can study and observe to the events that happen in our life? Like where is there room for God? Like I just don't know if I can ascribe to that belief.
I'm very much a huge fan of what somebody believes is right for that person. Um, I really dislike proselytizing. I really dislike trying to convert people, um, just because I've had so many negative experiences with those kinds of people. So if someone were to ask me, like, why should I believe in God? And for me, my response definitely would be, I mean, look around you. Like, how could you not? Like, you see the sunset going down, and you've got all of these beautiful colors. It's like a painting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, that's God. Lilac bushes blooming in the spring. To me, that's God. All the beauty in the world is, to me, is God. And I can't remember the verses, but the Quran actually talks about um, what we now believe to be the Big Bang Theory. About there is a few verses where they talk about God expanding the universe from a single point.
Yeah, yeah, I find it interesting that a lot of creation stories in various cultures often say
Yeah,
something like goes from small to big, goes from
yeah,
darkness to light. Um, which yeah, but
yeah.
man, we that's a whole different discussion.
Yes, yes.
I would agree that like there's no, I don't think there's proof of God in the
Mm-hmm.
same way that there is something that you can prove in this world, and I think that has to do with like the limitations of our personally, I believe it has to do with the limitations of our faculties to
Mm-hmm.
sense in the same way. Like, it's not something you can see or hear. That's what we usually think of as senses. But
Yeah.
I do think that you can sense it in some way. Like when you experience beauty or justice or peace, like you experience God. Even like in the negative things, when you experience
Mm-hmm.
like sadness, like there's a sacredness to the world. And I feel like that's something your heart can be sensitive to. I think at this point, the way I speak about it has definitely been influenced by how Islam speaks about it, like your heart being able to see, your heart being able to
Mm-hmm.
feel. But I think like even a couple of years ago when I was first thinking about Islam and like if it's something I could accept in my life, that there was still that sense of like, well, I know I have this sense of feeling of something,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that is what God is. That's just what we call it in English. That's just the word we use for the sense of feeling of something
Yeah.
bigger and belonging to something bigger and something divine. So yeah, I like if someone is not in a place where they feel like they believe in God or like have a feeling or a sense of God, like
Mm-hmm.
I am not the person to like tell you
No.
you have to feel that. Like,
Yeah, and I don't think that's my job. Like, Islam teaches us that we don't judge.
mhm.
So, by me I feel like if I were to tell somebody that they had to believe in God, like, how can you not, like, that's me judging them. And that's not okay for me. Like, I try to be as non judgmental and, you know, you do you in the common vernacular as I can be, because everybody's truth is their truth. And it's not my place to tell them that they're wrong.
So in like kind of breaking down the first shahada as well, there is no God but God. What would you say to someone who is like, well, I don't believe in the Muslim God. I believe in another God, whether the Christian God or the Hindu gods. Like the idea that there are like different gods that you can believe in.
My personal belief, so the Muslim God and the Christian God, one are the same. Also, Jewish God, Yahweh, God, Allah, they're all the same because we're all come back from Abraham. But when it comes to like the polytheistic religions, my personal belief is that, and actually it says this in the Quran, that God comes down to you in your own language, in your own culture. So if your culture is set up where a polytheistic religion makes the most sense to fit in your culture, I believe that's God showing you his or their different aspects as different manifestations. Where like I feel like our culture here, especially in the US and the West, is very more centered around one God, like that fits with us.
Mm.
Um, so it really, I think it really depends on the person's culture. You know, who are we to say that um, the gods of the Aztecs is not the same as the Abrahamic God, just showing different aspects and different manifestations of itself.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely believe in what I call the greater monotheism, which is
Mm-hmm.
the idea that there is one God, and therefore all these things that we call God in the various human cultures must be God.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can like see what I call. This is not like an academic term. This is just how I
Yeah.
have found it helpful to think about it. Like you can believe in narrow monotheism, which is I believe in one God and that God's name is, and it's different than the other gods, and
Yeah.
therefore those other gods are wrong. But that just hasn't been my experience. And again, I feel like a lot of this comes down to like the experience of your heart and not necessarily just your
Mm-hmm.
mind. Like I feel like you can get caught if you're trying to think
Yeah.
through it, which happens to me all the time. I love thinking through things. Um,
I'm more fly by the seat of your pants.
but my experience has been when I experience sacredness, even if it's in the context of a different tradition, like uh, in the context of a different tradition, it still feels sacred.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it must all be God, and that
Yeah.
doesn't mean I understand
Mm-hmm.
how it all fits together.
Mm-hmm.
But being a limited human being, I don't think I'm meant to or
Yeah.
need to. And so I definitely don't espouse like, well, Islam says that this is how God looks and feel. You know, it doesn't really. But like
Mm-hmm.
these are the ways we should understand God. And then you go to a different tradition who understands divinity and sacredness in a very different way
Mm-hmm.
that may look like polytheistic, and you go to them and say, "Oh, they're wrong." I don't think that
No.
is helpful. I think the understanding of like polytheism that Islam kind of preaches against is this idea of taking temporary, limited things and
Mm-hmm.
yet kind of like worshiping them for like
Yeah.
very self-serving and short-term reasons.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to worship this thing that I named, which is like a rock.
Mm-hmm. It comes down to
And
the idol thing.
yeah, I'm gonna like have an, but people would be like, well, isn't that an idol? Well, here's how I understand the idea of idols. Is what I guess what I'm saying is that you're taking something that's temporary or relatively inert, and you're in a transactional relationship with that thing. So it's not like you're trying to make your heart more sensitive to divine found in everything. It's more of if I give you this, you give me that in a very like limited, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
in this for what I can get out of it situation,
Yeah.
relationship. And that's what I see as like harmful polytheism, when
Mm-hmm.
you're just in it for whatever your short-term
Yeah.
immediate goals are. And you're not really being like becoming sensitive to this underlying order or underlying thing that kind of connects all
Mm-hmm.
like everything together. So that's how I personally like interpret that idea. Like when, because obviously like the prophet was very much preaching against the polytheism of his day, and I think the way I interpret that is the polytheists of his day were like very transactional, right? Like it
Yeah.
was like, oh, we're gonna believe this because it will make our clan
Mm-hmm.
have power,
Yeah.
uh, and not really like being sensitive to their greater concerns. And yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so that's there is no God but God.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I understand it.
Yeah. And like I come to my understanding of God. So I have taken a lot of comparative religion classes and I've read a lot of religious texts from various religions. And so, like, if you look at like the Bhagavad Gita and like the Old Testament, they're really similar in a lot of places. So, how do these two completely disparate religions, religious traditions, a monotheistic culture and a polytheist, like, why are they so similar?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's like, well, that's God showing different aspects of themselves to different cultures
Yeah,
and how it, how they, like, because perception's everything.
and I also think having that basic orientation that you're looking for what's good, you're looking
Mm-hmm.
for what's sacred, you're looking for what's the same is important. I remember I was reading a text recently that was talking about this, like the analytical study of things is the study of separation, and that's not that it's bad, but when it's like imbalanced by also like studying the unity of things, then
Mm-hmm.
you just start to think everything is different. So like sometimes when I love religious studies books and religious studies works and studying religion, and I would think religious scholars would actually disagree with me and saying, no, all the religions are so incredibly different. And it's like it's true, they're all
Mm-hmm.
so incredibly different and varied.
Yeah.
But I've also like found so much that is similar about them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love finding those connections as well, and that's ultimately why I felt comfortable saying the Shahada, because it was one of the few
Mm-hmm.
religious traditions that I had encountered that was saying there is no God but God. So it like it affirmed, or I guess asked you to affirm this unity and oneness, and to me this breadth of like
Mm-hmm.
the experience of God,
Yeah.
that is universal and just permeates the entirety of creation. And that Muhammad is the messenger of God. And it was like the messenger, a messenger, but not the only one.
Yeah.
And then in learning about the Prophet himself and about his life, and then reading the Quran, like I felt that this was, well, that, but also realistically, like the experience of the Muslims in my life and seeing how
Mm-hmm.
they had interpreted their religion and how and the type of people that they were. And I was like, okay, if they can be these type of people by following this religion, then I think I too can trust Muhammad, peace and
Mm-hmm.
blessings of Allah be upon him, as well as Jesus.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well said.
thank you. It's a little bit of a shorter discussion today. to cover such a giant topic too. It clearly like has so many things coming off of it, but that's the point. There's so much more to talk about. Next week we'll be talking about the next the next value. We have a conversation built around that. We already have that event set up on Facebook if you want to check it out. And we'll be back here. We're going to try to live stream it actually on Facebook and
Next
Twitter.
week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then the week after that, we thought we'd actually skip three for a moment. For those of you familiar with our values, and we're going to go straight to four, which talks about there can be no compulsion in religion, and in religious practice, which is one of our values. And we thought it would be important to create a women and women identified people only conversation to talk about the judgment that women may face in religious spaces. And hopefully, we'll be live streaming that as well. So that's the goal for July 7th, I
Yes.
believe. So, yeah, those are the next 2 weeks, and we're really excited about it.
Yes.
As always, we're here at Plymouth Congregational every Saturday. It's now from 6 to 8. And please come and join the conversation. See you next week.